I like to think of myself as a world traveler. Or at least I would be if Sally Mae weren't robbing me every month. I traveled out of the country for the first time last summer. And for 4 days, I spent my nights basking in the white sanded beaches of the Bahamas. 80-degree weather, sun-kissed natives everywhere I turned. I loved every minute of it. But before going, I had to go through the tedious process of getting my passport. And while doing so, while getting all of my legal documents together, I started to think about the process of citizenship. More specifically, how we attain, authenticate, and police citizenship in this country. How many of you have been asked the question, so, what are you? Don't you hate that question? I just want to shake them and say, I'm a human being! In my case, my brown skin and twists leads some to assume that I'm an islander. So when I tell them I'm black, they immediately respond with, no. Where are your parents from? Virginia? I can see the disappointment on their faces, so I try to comfort them with more evidence. Listen, I was born in Virginia. I grew up in Jersey. Apparently, W.E.B. Du Bois was right when he said that as a black woman, I must prove that I'm also American. As if my ancestors' sweat didn't cleanse the very dirt we walk on. Like the American flag wasn't the rag they used to mop up pools of their own blood. Like the cotton on your skin didn't sprout out of the gashes of cracked black backs. So tell me again how my black skin isn't rightfully, unquestionably American. But I noticed that not only do we police citizenship transnationally as it relates to our birthplaces, but we subtly police the spaces in which we live our everyday lives, our neighborhoods, schools, jobs, churches, and in doing so, we've constructed a symbolic sense of citizenship, one in which our physical bodies act as passports. And as we approach the gates of different social arenas, we're either stamped with approval and endowed the rights and privileges of that social space, or, in the case of Trayvon Martin and countless others, not only denied access, but sentenced to public execution. So in essence, our very lives depend on our ability to attain and authenticate citizenship right here. I think we as socially progressive liberals at BU can agree that most of the social spaces of value in this country are dominated by white, middle class, heterosexual, able-bodied, college-educated Christian males. This reminds us of the relationship between identity and power, right? This identity holds the most social, political, and economic capital that gains access in this country. And the more I alter my culture, my attitude, and my physical body to conform to the systematic constructs of that identity, the more power and privileges I inherit, and the more valuable my life is in the eyes of our society. So it's less about what our identity actually is and the personal prejudices and hatred that might be tied to it, and it's more about the structural power and privileges that our identity affords or deprives us of. The more I started to think about it, all of us are assimilating to these social spaces in some degree, right? It's what's expected of us, to be successful and accomplished. But what of those of us who occupy conflicting social spaces? I'm talking about the spaces that have waged a very literal war against one another. Do we then carry dual citizenship, effortlessly alternating between opposing identities? Or does the polarism between those spaces render us spaceless? Thus, we are both the ally and the enemy the native and the foreigner, the oppressed and the oppressor. What if we were to argue the case of the domestic black nomad? I grew up in Jersey off of Exit 13, and I lived in several different neighborhoods throughout my childhood. But they all had one thing in common: ghettoization. A subpar education system, low-income housing, violence, addiction, juvenile incarceration, you name it, we pretty much had it. You see, in my world, people just walk on the dry blood staining the sidewalk, forgetting the names of babes called home at the sound of a gunshot. Little black girls mother fatherless sons and daughters who have no reason to believe that even God would claim them. The streets are cluttered with the debris of shattered lives, empty promises and outright lies told by those sworn to protect. They say that serving is what they do best, but want us to believe that handcuffed Victor White shot himself while under arrest. They never confess. But welcome to my world, where crazed minds find their only salvation in Satan's elixir. But no one blames them, because even God turned his back and never spared them from the pain. So they just keep stalking the streets, bathing their memories in rum and whiskey. Here, black boys palm their mother's love for the chance to evolve into the gods their fathers never were. The right to life is only earned. So before they can even get on their knees and pray for a better tomorrow, they must fight to survive today. So we show them the way. Run fast, speak loud, hands up, guard your face, hands up out of your pocket, hands up through the metal detectors in your school hallway. Here, schools imprison black minds behind barred windows and steel fences. Wardens patrol classrooms, schooling 5-foot convicts on how to keep quiet, keep still, keep thinking they are the dark monsters hiding in their closets. That was my reality. And the problematic thing about it was that I, along with many others, were okay with it. This was our home. It was all we knew. And after a while, we began to normalize it. So as a child, I had many of the same questions that some still have today. Why are we so enraged about police officers killing us when we kill each other every day? Why can't others say the N-word if we say it to one another? Here I was living it, seeing it every day, and having the same sentiments as those who were on the outside looking in. That was until I read Carter Woodson. He said, if you can determine what a man shall think, you don't have to concern yourself about what he will do. See, if you can make him think that he is justly an outcast, you don't have to order him to the back door. He'll go without even being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. Sometimes we normalize our worlds so much so that we not only become victims of them, but we become active operatives manning the gears of our own oppression. Can it be that we do so ignorantly and subtly through the words we use, the music that we bump to in our cars, the clothes we rock? Think about how easy it is, how self-gratifying it is. And therein lies the danger. After this realization, I knew I had to get out. So the first chance I got, I came to Boston. And it was clear to me very quickly that this space was nothing like home. And I was both amazed and grateful, but eventually terrified. One of my earliest memories at BU was in the stairwell of Warren Towers B. And I remember sitting in the fetal position, crying on the phone with my mom. You see, after about a month, I realized that BU's idea of diversity was a crock pot full of wealthy white and Asian kids, sprinkled in with some suburban black kids just for color, and a dash of urban black kids for spice. Being the only sign of melanin in my classroom made my skin crawl. I felt like people were gawking at me, taunting me, waiting for me to screw up, to misspell something or to lose my temper, something that would prove that I didn't belong there, and give them the permission to write me off as just that black girl. A feeling of isolation had taken me. And I remember saying to my mom, this was a mistake. I'm not like these other kids. I don't come from where they come from, and I don't have the things that they have. I'm not going to make it here, Ma. Take me home. Home to poverty and racial profiling. Take me home to violence and addiction. At least when I'm there, I'm with those who look like me and understand me. And even though it might not be right or fair or safe there, at least we're together. At least I'm not alone. You see, anything's better than being alone. Even home. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't go back. Let's face it, I needed the symbolic capital and resources that this space would offer me. So I accepted that my success and happiness here would come at the cost of my identity. After a while, it grew easier to lie about what my parents did for a living. I took out my favorite red weave and I dyed my hair black. I enunciated every syllable of every word just so I could hear my professor say, Chelsea, you were so articulate. The American idea of racial progress is measured by how fast you become white. So every morning after you wash your face, but before you brush your teeth, ask yourself, how white are you today? Stand up straight, squeeze that button, slick those kinky curls back, and you're off. You must be a respectable citizen in society today. Tax-paying, law-abiding, white-acting citizen today. So get rid of that dip in your hip, tone down that sass in your voice, because in the words of your people, ain't nobody got time for that. Only speak when spoken at. Keep quiet about racial issues because you don't want to be labeled the black girl who cares about black issues, because no one wants to be friends with black people who care about black issues. They just want to appropriate black culture, enjoy black company while ignoring black struggle. So throw out that bloody hoodie and put on a tie. Turn down that hippity hop, wipe that chicken grease off your fingers and go. As I said, you must be a respectable citizen in society today. Tax-paying, law-abiding, white-acting citizen today. So before you head out that door, don't forget to ask yourself, how white are you today? Have you left those INGs, turned those does into thes, and tamed that mane? Have you exchanged those Jordans for Sperry's, chosen golf in lieu of basketball, adopted colorblind politics and Fox News? If so, the following restrictions have always applied. You may attempt to pursue happiness, however futile those attempts may be, but you most likely, most certainly will not be granted the right to life or liberty. Because the one thing that you can never alter is the only thing that ever truly mattered. Your body is your civic felony. Your history is your recorded offense to which you are sentenced reasonable suspicion. Your intelligence will always be questioned, your innocence dismissed. You may very well die in the streets without pity or sympathy because you have no humanity. So before you even ask yourself, how white are you today? Remember, you ain't nothing but a nigga. Despite black respectability politics, it didn't matter how high my GPA was. My professors still treated me like a result of affirmative action. It didn't matter how rational or articulate I was in the boardroom. My colleagues still looked at me like I was the angry black woman. I would never gain full citizenship here because at the end of the day, I was and would always be the oppressed. Rejected from that space, I sought refuge in the only place that I had ever called home, my neighborhood. After all, if anyone were going to accept me, they would, right? But when I returned to my birth space, this time I couldn't effortlessly pass through the gates. My newfound Black identity was now being policed by my own. I was now one of those bougie Blacks, one of those uppity Negroes, those civilized colored folks who had gone off to the big house only to forget their field hand days. This hurt. The policing of my Blackness by my own hurt. But I couldn't blame them. Even though I was proud of my education and I knew I had changed for the best, I had also changed for the worst. This whitewashed space of my college years not only managed to change the way I spoke or dressed or carried myself, but it changed the way I thought about my community, my family, and my friends. When I called home, instead of empathizing with my family, I judged them. You can't pay your bills? Work more hours. He wouldn't have pulled you over if you didn't do anything wrong. Well, maybe if you weren't so disrespectful, people would give you some respect. As if those brown and Black hoodlums and thugs weren't my father and uncle and nephews. As if I didn't know what it was like to slave day in and day out only to have enough to be broke. As if that wasn't my home. As if they weren't my own. I had forgotten. Forgotten that it was I who stood on their shoulders. Forgotten that my mom had taught me more than any tenure professor had. Forgotten that I, too, was the oppressed. And ultimately, I ended up right back where I started, taking on the likeness of my oppressor. In an effort to belong to both spaces, I didn't belong to either. In an effort to try to balance conflicting identities, I no longer knew who I was. Black, white, ratchet, bougie, rich, poor, copywritten identities that I had violated. And the more I walked away from each space, the more I walked towards each space, the more I walked away from that which I loved and those whom I loved. I am both the oppressed and the oppressor, the native and the foreigner, the ally and the enemy. There are many of us struggling with this double consciousness. Whether you're Black, white, Muslim, queer, we all find ourselves torn in some way. And unfortunately, I'm not exactly sure how we go about healing ourselves. But what I do know is that it starts with self-examination and agency. Examine your own privilege. Whether you're in the projects or you're in college dorm rooms, we have to choose to be agents instead of passive inhabitants to our social spaces. But agency on an individual level isn't enough. Acknowledging oppression through spoken word isn't enough. Sitting in spaces like these and having academic progressive conversations just isn't enough. The truth is that even if all of us in this room decided that from this day forward, we were going to be socially conscious, loving, accepting human beings in our daily lives, oppression would still exist. People would still be poor. Women would still be called sluts, cunts, and whores. I'd still be considered the diversity hire. Black boys would still die. We still teach our sons not to cry. My 6-month-old nephews would still be considered dangerous. White-collar crime would still only get a slap on the wrist. White people would still have privilege, and I'd still get the question, what are you? So now what? Be unapologetically disruptive. Be defiant and brutally honest. Instead of doing something that gives you peace at night, do something that terrifies you. Something that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Write a letter, petition, lobby, boycott. Do something that invokes tangible, sustainable change in the institutions that govern our social spaces. Because maybe the cure to our psychosocial disease within us is without. This is a harder step. It's harder because we actually have something to lose by doing it, right? But if we really examined our humanity, our sanity, our livelihood, maybe we'll find that we're already losing it. Thanks, guys.